For instance, this is from that global study, only 23% use it weekly. Very small number even use it in the first place. In China, it's a little bit higher. However, Baidu's having a really hard time understanding dialects in China, so the accuracy is pretty bad. So just, again, the keyboards are hard to use in China, so they're more inclined to talk to a device, but the results are bad. So that's holding back adoption. Here's Thailand, so a little bit better accuracy here, so you're seeing a little bit better adoption. And there's the combination. So obviously, if you're here in the US, we created these devices. They're literally created here, marketed here, so you have a early adopter set here in the US that would make sense for you. If you're in that younger demo, male, early adopter group. Because here's the data on how many people are adopting. Mind you, this is from 2 years ago. But obviously, if it's younger, and that's your audience, that would make sense. Or if you're in the product version, or you're in e-commerce space and you're marketing products, because most people find that when you use a text input, the results are bad. So potentially better if you talk. I think this is actually potentially better if you have an image search function. Because at the current rate, only 5% of people are using voice for commerce. Prediction's pretty high. It's a prediction though. 50% by 2020. Though from that same study, they're showing that the adoption curve for voice commerce is steep. Interestingly, groceries. So if you're in the grocery market and you already have a smart speaker, this is a study of people that already had smart speakers, 56% plan on shopping with a voice device. I think that makes a lot of sense. You're in the kitchen, I ran out of whatever, right? The use case makes a lot of sense. And local. Hopefully everybody in the marketing space here has seen this. Basically everybody is using voice search for local. So if you are a local business and you haven't buttoned up your local SEO, or if you're a global company and you have a lot of local offices, this is a huge opportunity for you. All right, so let's get into what actually happens with voice search. And again, for everyone who came in, this is the Google presentation. I'm gonna be talking all about Google Home, not Alexa, so just that's my one big caveat. So here's how Google works. So the queries are different from an SEO strategy perspective, obviously. If I type something in like weather Paris, that's what I'm typing, but then I talk, I actually have the full phrase that I speak into the device, right? So the query length is different. The optimization is different. Most of the time, the home will read it from the website source and the rich snippet most of the time. The other big caveat is everybody seen the announcement, this is only just yesterday, about the speakable markup from Google? Anybody? Cool, I'm giving you cutting edge news. Anyway, so Google yesterday rolled out schema markup where if you're a news organization, you can actually codify what you want to be read out loud with markup. So I'll go into that. But so there's sort of 3 different ways that Google will read your stuff, but ultimately all of it is following SEO best practices. If you don't know what a featured snippet is, this is what it looks like on desktop. So this is what a lot of times it gets read from. And you can't advertise on this yet. All right, so how do you actually optimize for voice search? Hopefully this is why everybody's in the room. All right, so there's basically 8 different things you need to do in order to optimize for voice search. Step 1, follow SEO best practices, and that includes having your tech house in order. So make sure that you're loading fast. I'll give you tools for how to check that. You have to make sure you don't have any crawling or indexing issues. I audit tons of client sites that have got that, especially if you're a site on the larger end. This happens all the time. But you need to make sure that Google is not having trouble discovering and crawling your URLs. You need to make sure you use structured data, not just the speakable markup that I talked about, but structured data in general. You need to be on HTTPS. Is anybody here with their website not on HTTPS yet? Everybody's moved over? Awesome, because the warning rolled out this week. So if you're not on HTTPS, your users will be warned and you'll lose 30% of them because they will get scared away. And you need to make sure that your website's basically working. So low bounce rate, good engagement, which means your metrics need to be clean and clear. All right, so mobile friendly and fast. So if you're not sure, there is a tool inside of Google where you can actually test whether or not your website, this is a public one, whether anybody's website is mobile friendly. Inside Google Search Console, you have a mobile usability report. I'd encourage you to do both. It's not so much that you pass here, it actually has to be usable on a mobile device. I've had clients where I check the public report they get an A. I check inside Google Search Console and there's mobile usability errors. So it has to be functional on a mobile device because you're chasing the user. You want to make sure when the user comes in from mobile search, they stay. So those are the two tools that I'd recommend that you take a look at. The other thing is blazingly fast. So this is a study from Backlinko. He was actually looking to see how fast the results were that got read out as a voice snippet. This is time to first byte. So if anybody here has used the Google Chrome Lighthouse tool, no, awesome. I'm telling you all sorts of new stuff. So Google has this tool inside Chrome. It's also a plugin. And it will actually run a report on your website, giving you a couple SEO pieces and also speed information. And so time to first byte is the moment when something usable loads on the screen. So Google really wants to make sure, as do your mobile users, they want something real. They want to be reassured that something is happening instead of waiting forever for something to load, basically. So the time to first byte for voice is really fast. It's under a second. So I'd recommend that if you don't already know what your current speed is, here are the tools to figure that out, all free. So the first one is GTmetrix. It also gives you all of this intel about how to fix stuff. If you're not a very techie person, you can hand it over to developers half the time, and it's a prioritized list they can work off of. The Chrome Lighthouse tool, which is also free, that's Google, and it's using real Chrome data from real users to evaluate your website. So that's where the data comes from. And webpagetest.org is useful for two reasons, also developed by Google back in the day. On that tool, you can stack up you and your competitors. You can run a video. You can see how slow or fast you are compared to your competitors. You can also tell web page tests, please don't load this third-party script to see if perhaps that's why you're so slow. Super useful. So definitely check out those two. So structured data. Everybody, structured data is basically all the search engines got together, I want to say almost 10 years ago. It seems like I've been talking about structured data. And they all decided that, you know what's going to be easier for us to understand your information is if when you are talking about a book, you use a code that says book. And when there's an author on the page, you're using the code we all agree says author. That's basically what you're doing with structured data markup. So it does all sorts of cool things in search. When you're actually, as a user, when you're Google searching and you see reviews pop up or you see a picture from your favorite recipe, that is getting pulled from structured data. So the webmaster or the marketer has added this additional markup on the back end. So super useful for having rich snippets, super useful for, in general, having Google understand your website, the associated social media properties you've got, that kind of thing. Also useful if you ever want to get a knowledge panel in Google. It's not a guarantee that that gets you there, but it certainly helps Google figure out who you are as a brand. Also useful for voice search. So this is how you would check to see if you have any structured data in place. You also have a tool, everybody, inside Google Search Console where you can check your own structured data. It has to be error-free. I have plenty of clients that have it in place, but they didn't realize it was throwing errors. So just an FYI, you need to have it be error-free. Super important for local SEO that you have the appropriate markup for local. The other reason you want structured data. So versus Amazon Alexa, where you have to go through this process of building a skill, somebody has to know what the skill is, then actually ask for it. Google is going about it totally differently. If you already have structured data in place, Google's making it easy for you as a marketer and is just providing an action in Google Assistant. And that's what's happening here. This happened maybe 2-3 months ago, where if you were a news organization, this is a screenshot actually from one of my clients that got the notification, and you had structured data markup in place already. So you had already marked up on the page, I'm a news organization, this is a news article. Google went ahead and emailed you and said, you have a directory page in our Google Assistant Action Directory. I think you should claim it. Go ahead and claim it. And then when you do that, you automatically get an action in Google Assistant. So if this was a podcast, you automatically get the play button in Google Assistant that plays. Makes much easier. So make sure you've got the structured data markup in. I know it sounds very techy, but it's super important you put that in place, because when you have that in place, then suddenly Google's going to surface awesome stuff for you in the voice applications it already has, versus having to work on some coding. So this is the announcement from yesterday. So it's only for news organizations. If you don't know what it takes to become a official news organization in Google News, I have a link to my blog post because I work with a lot of news organizations like Roll Call and a couple others. So there's a massive process to make sure you get included. But if you are included and you add this markup, then Google automatically knows when somebody is asking for a particular article in Google Assistant or Home, I know exactly what you want me to read, and it will just read the snippet. Yeah? So, super useful if you're actually a news organization. The other thing I think you should think about is the context of, this is from a persona perspective. So when you're creating your personas as a marketer, when are people searching for that information, and does your content work in that context? And hopefully they're not driving like this dude. But I think this is important to think about because I have a client who, it's a big medical association, so their members are physicians. They have a podcast. You look at their podcast reviews, and every single one is like, well, I was hoping that I could get information from this organization via podcast during my morning commute. But when I listened to the podcast, I realized it's like the head of the association, who I guess has a bit of a droney voice, so that's a kind of a bummer. But he's like verbatim reading their journal articles, like intensive amounts of information. Right. And so the feedback from all the podcasters is like, I can't do this during my commute. This is not a format that's working for me. So anyway, keep that in mind, that what are people going to be doing when they're searching for your stuff? And are you providing a response that is appropriate if they're distracted with kids running around or they're commuting? Super important. Also important because if you didn't realize, Google personalizes for all of that, right? So Google, for you as a searcher, Google knows exactly where you are when you're searching. They know who is in your social network. Has anybody taken a look at their Google dashboard recently? You all have a dashboard. It's pretty creepy if you haven't looked at it. If you talk to your device, you can hear your own voice read back to you because Google saves all of that. So Google knows a lot about you, and when you search, it contextualizes your search based on as much data as it's got about you. So it knows that I'm standing next to a metro when I'm looking for information, or it knows I'm on my desktop, or it even knows the context, your future context. So if I get engaged and I start looking for travel, in 10 minutes it can figure out that I'm looking for wedding travel, and then it will save future context for me, so it will save baby shower planning. Pretty creepy. But anyway, so Google's very smart, so I think it's important when you're marketing to your audience that you have some clue about the context they are in. The other thing, in relation to preparing for this voice search in Google revolution, is it's possibly time for you to think about your brand voice documentation. I know this sounds very boring, but I've worked with plenty of people that haven't even done the basic documentation of, are we witty? Do we swear? Do we want to sound like a thought leader? That kind of stuff. And I think it's really important for you to think about that now, just to make sure your marketing is all aligned. And research is bearing out that most people, when they're hearing your voice back, want to have a personality. They want to have a flow, right? Like from Progressive. So if you get to this point, because I think this is the future, it's not tinfoil hat, but if I was to give a prediction about where Google is going, this is where I think Google is going. I think Google wants your audio content, and I think Google wants to play it back to people that are searching. So this is me helping you get prepared for that, okay? So think about it. If you had something read back, what would it sound like? There's other reasons you'd want to have brand voice documentation. This is the biggest reason why I help clients with it. You want to make sure that what you're doing with SEO, social, paid, trade shows, whatever, it all sounds the same. If you have an actual brand, you kind of get that vibe across all of that platforms, or if you have multiple people running your social media handles, that all sounds consistent, right? Because if you start flipping out Joe for Eileen, you want to make sure you don't sound different on social handles. So this is what it would sort of look like. The full documentation would actually have examples that you can hand off to junior staffers, which is usually what your social media people are, with we would post this, but we wouldn't post this, actually giving them some scenario planning. And this is what it looks like if you're doing it for SEO. So here's a couple examples of how that can pull through, which I think is really important because you're only spending, what is that, with an e-commerce shopping, I think you have 3 seconds of somebody's attention span when they're on Google search before they click. We all move really fast on Google. And so when you can have an experience like this that actually invokes emotion, I think you're possibly going to get more clicks. So out of all of these meta descriptions, let's read the Old Spice one. Discover legendary products for men, deodorant, antiperspirants, and fragrance. Old Spice, improve your man smells. Right, you giggles. Yeah, I giggled too when I read it the first time. I'm like, that's Old Spice. That's like marketing brilliance there. So anyway, I would recommend that when you document your brand voice, pull it through, including these old boring meta descriptions. They're boring, but they're your free clicks from Google search, and most people throw them away. And I think if you can invoke an emotion, you potentially are going to get more click-through. And considering one of Google's 3 major ranking factors right now is machine learning, RankBrain, which is a live usability test of your Google search results for every query. So when people don't click for particular queries, that gets just recorded as a test result. And possibly the computer decides that you're not the best result and drops you out of that query. So when you have that kind of behavior going on, live user test results of your Google search results, which is the reality today, and it's been the reality for like 2 years, I think invoking emotion and getting the click in Google search really matters. You don't get that unless you've documented what you're going to sound like. Okay, so local. How many people here have a local business or local office? A couple. I have bad news for you. Local SEO is so much extra work. So you do like this brand, yeah, right? You do this brand SEO, which is just, 2,000 ranking factors, 1,000 different moving pieces. And then on top of it, you get to do local SEO, and Google doesn't document it as well, and they change the rules all the time. It's very frustrating. So as of today, this is what you need to do for local SEO on top of the other stuff. You have to claim your Maps listing, the Google My Business listing. You need to optimize that. You have to make sure you have geo landing pages for every single local office. You need to make sure your name, address, phone number is consistent across the web, no punctuation changes, no capitalization differences. You need to make sure that you've got local citations to each and every single local page. This also matters, by the way, if you're a global brand and you have a listing in a different country. Same thing, you gotta start tracking down links from San Jose if that's where your office is. You need to get full reviews, et cetera, et cetera. So if this is new to you, I have a checklist on my website, and I'm sorry, because it certainly is this whole bit of extra work that's really frustrating, because it really is. Google pulls the rug out from underneath you. And they're always rolling out new features. Their newest one is people on their Google devices can actually add categories and provide you feedback or ask asinine questions that you then need to go track down and answer. Very frustrating. Okay, so then you need to answer their questions. Let's get back to this feature snippet. I want my voice result to be displayed. So how do I actually do the featured snippet thing? What you really need to do is know what the question is and directly answer it in your copy, pretty much. There's formats, there's guides online, but the gist comes down to you need to make sure you're answering the question. The challenge is you don't even get a chance to play unless you're ranking in the top 5, which is why I started this presentation with most people in the SEO world aren't getting super excited about voice search because frankly, it's just SEO. You just have to do SEO, really good SEO, and then you get voice search opportunities. So that's the big takeaway, is that just tighten up your SEO program in general, you'll probably be okay. But the other tip is that it needs to be scannable, readable. Most of the time, there's a huge number of citations and a huge number of images on those pages. This is from the Backlinko study, so if you're kind of curious, I would go ahead and take a look at that study. And of course, mobile and fast loading. So if you're kind of curious, how do I start my voice strategy? The first thing you need to do is figure out if you already have people searching for you via voice. The easiest way to do this is to go into Google Search Console, that's your own data with Google, and actually flip to question queries. You can filter your keyword report, put in the who, what, when, etc., and you'll see stuff like this. So this is from one of my clients. How to get into pharmacy school. There's no way somebody typed that. That's gotta be somebody talking. I mean, mind you, I'm guessing, but my guess is that I think it's somebody talking. The next one is how to ask for a letter of recommendation. That's a full sentence. It's got to be a voice search query. So the wah-wah is that Google Search Console doesn't tell you, yes, definitely, that was a voice search query. You just kind of have to guess. But I would start with your own data. And then beyond that, what I would do is use 2 free tools. So one is the keywords, Answer the Public. Anybody used Answer the Public yet? You're going to be surprised when you go. It's got this frumpy old man video that's kind of like, Anyway, so you're going to be surprised. I'm like pre-warning you. But when you type something in, what it will do is actually tell you all the different ways, it's pulling from Google Suggest, all the different ways people have asked a question around your core keyword. Now, the power tip is that if you install Keywords Everywhere plugin in Chrome, it'll actually show you keyword volume for each of those, because normally it shows you keywords without the volume. So that will overlay a volume element. Faster way to get you there, to figure out what are the types of questions that people ask about me and my products and what I offer. The other tip is that, who here is familiar with the Google Human Raters? Anybody know they exist? Both search engines have part-time people that are paid to evaluate search results. to make sure your stuff is quality enough to make it into Google search. They don't do it real time. What they do is evaluate results, and it gets baked back into the algorithm. So if you thought it was just a computer, it's not. There's human beings. A coworker of mine was married to one. I know they exist. But anyway, so they roll out these rater guidelines. This is the new one for voice search. So I thought you should probably be aware of this. So in particular, it says that the raters are supposed to evaluate the usefulness of the response. So if you are doing any optimization of your copy for voice search queries, take a look at the updated Google Human Rater Guidelines. And here's the future thinking somewhat. So Google just rolled out this ability for your podcast to get optimized or get pulled through in Google Assistant. They have a new podcast app. You didn't have to do anything if you already had markup in place. That's what I'm saying. If your SEO plan is tightened up, then this stuff is just going to roll out to you, which is, I think, exciting. But the goal is that there's a head of podcasting for Google, I believe. He wants to double the podcasting audience in the next couple of years or something. So Google has this focus on getting more podcast listeners. Future thinking, I actually think Google wants to surface your audio content, regardless of whether it's podcast or not. So what happens is if you've submitted an RSS feed via Google's Search Console, so make sure you've got that account, it's free, and you've got the markup in place saying, I have a podcast, and there's a couple more links there where you should just make sure you've tightened up what Google says they want you to have in place if you have a podcast. You'll get this email saying, claim your podcast in our actions directory, and when you do, it gives you this on your Android device. This is only Android, but Android's like half the global adoption, right, globally. So anyway, you get these, and the awesome thing is they just play. There's no Stitcher app to download. There's nothing. From Assistant, I just play, and I'm listening to the podcast. Seamless. Seamless. So I would do this. Potentially think about getting your podcast in the Google ecosystem if you hadn't already thought about it. Probably most of you have been in the iPhone ecosystem. I'd encourage you to get in the Google one. Oh, my last tip is that if you are actively doing podcasting, keep in mind who is on the podcast, the entities in your podcast. Make sure that's well labeled. So if somebody is searching for the who of the person you're talking to, your podcast could get surfaced. And potentially think about somebody dropping in the middle of your podcast, because I have a feeling that might be where Google's going. So if there's an awesome answer to their question, but it was 4 minutes into your podcast, I believe Google will figure out how to surface that 4 minutes in. So just keep in mind. So if you have a podcast where you never introduce new listeners throughout your podcast, you just might want to think about maybe a different format where you remind people of what podcast they're listening to periodically, right? Anyway, I think this is very, very exciting. All right, let's talk about how you'd measure this. This is the other walk. Google's been awful about giving us this stuff. And this is because the Google Search Console data is an average ranking across everybody who's seen your stuff in Google Search. And they want to remove personally identifiable information. So there's got to be a lot of people speaking the same sentence into Google for them to show it to you as a keyword, right? So that's kind of a bummer. And they haven't figured out how to give you voice search data in a way that's actionable, and that doesn't give away personally identifiable information. So you can't really measure a lot of stuff inside Google Search Console or Google Analytics at the moment. What you can look at is organic impressions overall. You can look at your mobile keyword rankings, both inside Google Search Console and with an external tool. External ranking tools will show you whether you've got the featured snippet, so that would be useful if you're going to start chasing after a lot of these featured snippets. And then if you get in the actions directory, kind of a pain, but there's a separate actions analytics console. So it's not integrated with anything else, but if you're in there, you are going to get some additional data. All right, so the takeaways are, if you want to be in Google Home, basically, or Google Assistant, you just need to make sure you follow SEO best practices. You have to make sure you've got that structured data in place. If you're a news organization, do that news speakable structured data. I would develop a plan with a real strong persona about your target audience, including context if you don't already have that in place. I would also think about, let's see. I would also develop your brand voice documentation. So if you haven't actually articulated what your brand voice is and whether you're funny and whether you swear, whether you want to be a thought leader, et cetera, I would do that now because that's going to pivot you very effectively for when we can do more with this. Possibly think about what it would sound like. Like, would you be a female or a male answer? I think that's great stuff to do now. I think it would position you well. And take advantage of all that audio SEO stuff that I talked about, podcasting type stuff. And that's it. That was the speed round. super fast. I told you, I'm sorry. But time for questions, hopefully. How are we doing with time? Yeah. All of 3 minutes for questions. That was a lot of info. No questions? There we go. Oh, they're going to be published in like 15 minutes on SlideShare. So you can look for me on SlideShare. It's also going to be on my website. Yeah, you're welcome. Brain fry. Yeah, a lot of new information. I didn't see a lot of SEOs in the world. Oh, here we go. What other questions?
You mentioned the long search queries were likely to be voice, but in Google, it's standard search and autofill, like how to blah, 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 and will give you recommendations of what to fill. So I'm not sure it's accurate to assume that just because the query is long, that it was necessarily asked by voice.
Correct. It could, right. Most of the time, I both look for long queries and then an actual question. What is blah, 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 blah. But you're right. It's totally making a guess in the Google Search Console data. There's no other way to even look at it. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yes. Huge. Yeah, so that's actually, so the top 5 is to get a featured snippet, and that's generally people asking an actual question about when was Abraham Lincoln born kind of question, right? So for you, for a local business, most of the time people are looking for directions to your business, your contact hours, your phone number, that kind of stuff. Your challenge is going to be to get into the maps result. Most of the time for local search, that's what happens. You see the Google My Business maps up top. And for that, you're stuck in that it's only going to show stuff close to the physical searcher based on where they're standing with their phone. Yeah. So it'll depend on your search. Some of your search results, there might be organic listings below the maps that you could work on. But most of the time, it's really frustrating because you are pivoting around somebody's actual location. And you can't do anything about that. Yeah. I hate local search. I try to do as very little bit of as I can. Cool. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to hang out up front so you can, like, ping me. Cool. Thanks, guys.